So, how exactly should we think about the American Revolution on its 250th anniversary? I mean, it's a pretty massive question, right? We are fast approaching the nation's semi-quincentennial. Yes, that is a real word. The 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And you know, this isn't just some date circling on a calendar. It gives us this incredible, literally once-in-a-generation opportunity to reflect, not just on our history, but on exactly who we are today and, well, what we've inherited.
Welcome to This Explainer. I am genuinely so thrilled to walk you through this material today. We're going to be exploring some deeply insightful perspectives from Dr. Chris Flannery's essay, How to Think About the American Revolution. This essay is an absolute game changer right now because it strips away all the usual mythology and gets straight to the foundational truths of the country. My goal today is to unpack these ideas and show you how the revolutionary spirit isn't just, some abstract concept trapped in a dusty old textbook. It is a living, breathing inheritance that actively shapes our world today.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the journey today. We're going to start by defining the real American Revolution. Then we'll explore its legacy of freedom. After that, we'll look at the Ark of the Covenant, decode the Great Seal, and finally wrap things up with an unfinished work.
All right, Part 1, the real American Revolution.
When we think of the Revolution, our minds usually jump straight to Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, or the brutal freezing winter at Valley Forge, or maybe Yorktown. And look, while those daring acts of physical heroism are absolutely crucial, the author points out that the true revolution was actually something way deeper. Check out this profound reflection from John Adams, written way back in 1818, decades after the Declaration. He wrote, "A radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affection of the people was the real American Revolution." So, the actual revolution didn't just happen on a battlefield. It took place right inside the hearts and minds of the people. It was this massive psychological shift. They had to actually stop seeing themselves as subordinate subjects of a distant crown and start viewing themselves as equal free citizens who were totally capable of directing their own destiny. Now, there's a super fascinating contrast regarding the very definition of freedom in our source material. On one hand, you've got a 1992 Supreme Court opinion defining freedom as the ability to define one's own concept of existence. But the author contrasts this heavily with the founder's vision. Because for the revolutionary generation, experiencing freedom wasn't just about, defining your own reality or just doing whatever you wanted. It actually required the active exercise of self-government, virtue, temperance, and the daily duty of being a good neighbor, a dedicated parent, and an engaged citizen. Think about it. If you're going to totally remove a king from the equation, the only thing keeping society from collapsing into complete chaos is the moral character and self-restraint of the people themselves. So for them, freedom was a highly active, deeply moral pursuit.
Moving right along to Section 2, a legacy of freedom. The founding generation passed this legacy of moral freedom down to us. And the way it was cemented in history is filled with coincidences that are so extraordinary they honestly almost defy belief. Just walk with me through this timeline for a second. We obviously start in 1776 with the Declaration. By 1782, the Great Seal is approved, and we're going to decode that in just a bit. But the pivotal moment I really want to zoom in on right now is 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration. 50 years was a literal lifetime back then. The fact that this fragile, completely unprecedented democratic experiment actually survived a half-century was a monumental triumph. And looking ahead, sure, we have 2026, the 250th anniversary. But what actually went down in 1826 is nothing short of mystical.
So picture this. In 1826, John Adams is 90 years old. He's extremely frail, his health is rapidly declining. He'd actually been invited to celebrate the 50th anniversary in Washington, but was just way too well to make the trip. So just days before the 4th of July, local reps from his hometown asked him for a toast to read aloud at their local celebration. Summoning whatever strength he had left, he gave them these stirring words: "I will give you independence forever." When they asked if he wanted to add anything else to that, he just replied, "Not a word." It was literally his final public act. He passed away on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day after the formal adoption of the Declaration of Independence. No way, right?
But wait, the story doesn't even end there. Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of the Declaration, and Adams' longtime friend and sometimes rival, also got an invite to that 50th anniversary celebration. In his final written letter, declining the invite because of his own failing health, he penned these incredibly powerful words. He wrote, "The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. I mean, just let that metaphor sink in for a second. It is a brilliant, totally devastating rejection of the old European aristocratic order, this archaic idea that some people are born to be ridden like horses and kings are born with boots and spurs to ride them. And remarkably, as if destined by the very history they helped write, Thomas Jefferson also passed away on that exact same day, July 4th, 1826.
Which brings us to Section 3, Ark of the Covenant.
You really have to imagine being an American citizen back in 1826. The two absolute titans of the Revolution, Adams and Jefferson, the North and South poles of the independence movement, passing away on the exact same day on the exact 50th anniversary of the nation's birth. The news rippled across the country like a shockwave. So how did the next generation of American leaders even process this? Well, figures like Daniel Webster, who is arguably the most influential orator of the 19th century, he believed this miraculous timing was no accident. He publicly declared it a dispensation of the divine providence. For Webster and millions of others, this wasn't just some neat historical coincidence. It was clear, cosmic proof of divine favor. It cemented their absolute belief that the American Revolution was, without a doubt, one of the most important, divinely sanctioned events in all of human history.
And this brilliantly illustrates how deep this reverence went. It was echoed perfectly by John Quincy Adams, who was actually serving as president when he found out about his father's passing on that fateful July 4th. He gave a speech shortly after, drawing this powerful comparison between the American people and the children of Israel entering the Promised Land. He told his fellow citizens, "The Ark of your covenant is the Declaration of Independence." Just like the biblical Ark held the sacred laws, he was practically begging Americans to treat the Declaration's principles as sacred text, to bind these truths to their hearts, to write them on the doorplates of their houses, and most importantly, to teach them to their children so that the fragile blessings of freedom would actually survive for centuries to come.
All right, Section 4, Decoding the Great Seal.
So the crucial point here is that these philosophical ideals were deeply revered by early Americans. But how did they actually forge them into physical, everyday symbols? Well, designing the Great Seal of the United States was an incredibly arduous process. It took 3 entirely different committees working over 6 war-torn years. It originally kicked off on July 4, 1776, right after the Declaration was signed, with heavy hitters like Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams tasked with the design. But get this, it wasn't actually finalized until 1782 by a guy named Charles Thomson, the Secretary of Congress. And here is a truly wild, surprising fact. Thomson submitted the final approved design not as a sketch or a painting, but as a blazon. That's a highly specific written legal description using the ancient language of heraldry. Those written words alone are the final legal authority on what the seal actually is. The artwork just interprets the text.
If you happen to have a $1 bill in your pocket, just picture it in your mind's eye as we decode the front of the Great Seal. You'll see the famous Latin motto E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. It's super easy to take this for granted now, but think about the sheer difficulty of taking 13 fiercely independent, totally separate colonies, places with completely different economies, religions, and cultures who frankly bickered constantly, and joining them into a single cohesive sovereign nation. That motto perfectly captures that magnificent, totally improbable achievement.
Now, what's really interesting about this heraldry is the bald eagle itself. In traditional European heraldry, coats of arms almost always have supporters, lions, unicorns, or knights standing on either side holding up the central shield. Our American eagle has no supporters. The shield rests proudly unsupported right on its own breast. Why? Well, to visually show that a republic must rely entirely on its own virtue. It absolutely cannot lean on a monarch or a foreign power. In its right talon, it holds an olive branch representing peace. In its left, 13 arrows representing war. And look closely at the eagle's head. It's turned to its right, facing the olive branch of peace. This intentionally symbolizes that the United States recognizes the necessity of war, but fights only for the ultimate sake of peace. Every single detail has a profound moral purpose.
Okay, now flip that dollar bill over in your mind and let's check out the reverse side of the Great Seal, the side with the pyramid. Floating right above the Eye of Providence, we see the Latin phrase annuit coptis, which translates to, "He approves of what has been started." This connects right back to what Daniel Webster was saying earlier. It directly alludes to the founder's deep, unwavering belief that divine providence was actively watching over history and heavily favoring the American cause for freedom and self-government.
And right beneath the pyramid, written under the Roman numerals for 1776, it reads Novus Ordo Seclorum, New Order of the Ages. Think about the sheer, magnificent audacity of that phrase for a second.
The founders weren't just declaring a localized political split from Great Britain. No, they were officially marking 1776 as the absolute end of the old order of human history, an era dominated by feudalism, the divine right of kings, and forced aristocracy. They were loudly declaring the dawn of a completely new era for all of humanity, one based on the radical principles of human equality and self-government.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, an unfinished work.
All of this incredible, sweeping history connects directly to you and me sitting here today. Take one last look at that pyramid on the Great Seal. Do you notice how it's flat on the top? It is very explicitly an unfinished pyramid. Charles Thomson explained that the strong, wide base signifies strength and duration, but the fact that the structure is incomplete is deeply, profoundly symbolic. The great earthly work of American freedom is never totally finished. Freedom is a verb, folks. It requires every single generation's active participation, their civic virtue, and their daily dedication to the pursuit of happiness to keep building that pyramid upward. It takes the daily work of voting, engaging with our communities, and upholding the rights of our neighbors to keep this whole experiment alive.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought and challenge as we wrap up this explainer. As the 250th anniversary of our nation approaches, reflecting on everything we've covered today, how are you actively participating in the unfinished work of freedom and the pursuit of happiness? The founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor just to start the foundation of this work. Now, centuries later, the trowel is firmly in our hands to continue building it. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the real American Revolution. Keep learning, keep building, and I will catch you in the next one.